We are following breaking news headlines, giving you a live look out in Gaza as the Israel-Hamas war rages on, as we are learning that Israeli forces raided a militant stronghold in the occupied West Bank on Tuesday, which is today, killing at least 7 Palestinians, including a doctor. According to local authorities, we're told this is some of the deadliest violence in the territory since the war in the Gaza Strip erupted 7 months ago. Well, joining us live this morning for this breaking news alert is Senior Counsel at the Lawfare Project, Gerard Filitti. Gerard, always a pleasure having you here on Live Now. Good morning to you.
Good morning. A pleasure to be here.
So, Gerard, we know these invasions are nothing new to the Rafah region, but if you could provide some perspective about these invasions as we see these missile strikes continuing at this hour.
Well, we're seeing continuing efforts by Israel to quell the terrorist activity that's in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. We saw the raid in Jenin, which is about 80 kilometers north of Jerusalem and has been a stronghold of militant terrorist activity for many years. That is where a lot of Palestinian Authority and other terrorist groups have had strongholds and have been recruiting people, indoctrinating them, training them, storing weapons, and then transferring them to attack Israel proper. What we saw last night in Rafah as well, we saw a drone strike that killed another doctor and a couple of children as well. And this is one of the reasons, seeing the collateral damage in these strikes against terrorists, that we have the International Criminal Court coming out against Israel yesterday.
So glad you mentioned that. It segues into the next topic. As you mentioned, these missile strikes do not have an address. They land where they do. And we've seen from the ICC, but also from the ICJ, if we look at what led up to this, we've seen several genocide cases against Israel for what's happening out there in Gaza. And then leading up to what you just mentioned with the International Criminal Court, we are seeing that the prosecutors for the ICC are wanting to issue arrest warrants for the leaders of Israel and Hamas for what's happening out there in Gaza.
Correct. This is something that's been under threat for many years, actually. There have been many attempts to bring Israel before the International Criminal Court under charges of genociding or illegal occupation. And this is problematic because the ICC does not actually have jurisdiction over Israel. Israel is not a party to the Statute of Rome, the treaty that founded the ICC. So this extension of jurisdiction by issuing arrest warrants is very problematic under international law, but it's something that's also very politicized because many countries and many groups have been pushing the narrative of genocide claims against Israel until finally now the ICC seems to be buying into that narrative and issued arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and the Defense Minister Gallant.
I want to ask you, Gerard, with your background in law and criminal justice and other expertise that you have, how will this play out with the ICC? Because for some, they're not familiar with how the International Criminal Court operates. So we are hearing that they want to issue these arrest warrants. What does that look like? What could we see play out for this?
In practical terms, there's no immediate legal consequence. This is more of a political action than anything else. The ICC also issued arrest warrants for the leadership of Hamas, and those are as enforceable as you might guess, not very. What essentially happens now is Israel will be probably making objections to the ICC that these warrants are improper on jurisdictional basis. But the ultimate issue is the ICC doesn't have direct authority over Israel because, as I mentioned before, Israel is not a party to the convention that set up this court. So what happens essentially is if Netanyahu, Gallant, or anyone else subject to an arrest warrant travels to a country that is a member of the ICC, for example, France or Italy, then those countries theoretically have an obligation to detain and arrest those people and transport them to The Hague for trial. Whether this is actually likely to happen with a country like Israel, when many world leaders view this as a political rather than a legal attack on Israel, remains to be seen. But this is not going to change the conduct of the war. This is going to, if anything, enhance Netanyahu's authority within Israel because many view this as an illegitimate attack on Israeli sovereignty.
Absolutely amazing points you're mentioning. And with that, with what you just said, how does that relate to the ceasefire talks? Because with all of this going on, you would think the arrest warrants would make either side feel like they have something to prove now.
Well, I think what they have to prove is that the ICC is not something that is going to affect this, that they're not going to limit their activities based on what the ICC says. I think it's safe to say that the ceasefire negotiations are effectively dead. Israel is very interested now in completing its operations in Rafah, securing the release of whatever hostages may remain there, under the assumption that unfortunately many have likely already been killed by Hamas, and that any ceasefire will happen once Israel secures its military objectives and eliminates Hamas' presence in Rafah.
And that's the whole thing. We know from the very beginning, the Israeli military has said that this war is not against the Palestinian people, it's against Hamas. And they've been very vocal, Gerard, saying they will not stop until Hamas is defeated. So with this in play with the ICC, do you think it could be counteractive?
It could be counteracted, but not the issue ultimately is that Hamas could have stopped this at any time. The people of Gaza could have released the hostages. The leadership of Hamas, who created the conditions, who perpetuated these terrorist attacks, who created the atrocities of October 7, could have been surrendered for trial by the Israelis. This never happened. It put Israel in a position of having to fight for its existence and to eliminate this terrorist threat. Now, the ICC, whatever happens next with the ICC, everyone views this as politicized. It's not something that's going to affect the conduct of the war or Israel's need to defend itself. And if anything, this will lead to international pressure from countries like the United States to re-examine whether the ICC is actually doing anything meaningful or just creating hostility.
And look, Gerard, if we're being honest, I know some were thinking that the fighting would scale back since that came out yesterday from the ICC. But as we're following breaking news, the fighting is still going on with at least 7 people killed out in that West Bank area from the airstrikes. Doesn't look like the fighting will stop anytime soon.
Unfortunately, it does not. And if anything, the ICC ruling, the warrants, if anything, they create more hostility around the world, as we've seen escalating protests in the United States, in Europe, targeting Israel, targeting the Jewish people. Something like the ICC warrants, which buys into the Hamas propaganda that Israel is somehow committing genocide, this will only further the Jew hate that we're seeing on city streets playing out across the world. So what the ICC did is not just dangerous for the conduct of the war, but it's dangerous to Israeli and Jewish civilians around the world in light of the increasing hostility.
Great points you're making, Gerard. You know, I always enjoy speaking with you, having these candid and thoughtful conversations. Is there anything else you'd like to add before I let you go? Anything myself and the viewers need to be keeping a watchful eye on as several conflicts underway out in the Middle East?
No, I think that we're also seeing the interplay with what happened in Iran with the death of President Raisi, if that is going to affect the support that Hamas and other terrorist groups get. It's not likely to interrupt anything or change anything, but it's always worth keeping an eye on the stability of Iran and what happens there next.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Gerard, for joining us for this breaking news alert here on Live Now from Fox. You enjoy the rest of your day.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.